Okay, thank you everyone for joining us, and good afternoon, and welcome to our panels on careers in sustainability. My name is Stephanie, and I will be your chair today, and it is my pleasure to welcome our 5 panelists today. To my immediate left, we have Kieran Brophy, who is research lead for sovereign climate at the London Stock Exchange Group. And then next to Kieran, we have Yujia. Yujia is the career and leadership coach and founder of the Climate Circle. And next to Yujia, we have Victor Riesgo Gonzalez. Victor is a PDRA at the University of Oxford for the Department of Chemistry, and also materials, I believe, but mainly in chemistry. And next we have Isabelle Glotman, who is investment associate at Octopus Energy. And finally, we have Niel Grant, who is a senior expert at climate analytics. So to kick off today's session here, I am going to ask our panelists if they could share with the audience how your career has developed since leaving Imperial College and how you became interested in pursuing a career in sustainability. If you don't mind, Kieran, I'm going to put you on the spot and start with you.
Happy to, and thanks very much for having me, and great to be with some familiar faces as well. My name is Kieran Brophy. I'm the research lead of Sovereign Climate at the London Stock Exchange Group. Sovereign, for those who are wondering what that means, it just means country level. So country level data and analytics of countries and assessing them from an investment context. I guess, being honest, my career trajectory is quite, I think we would call non-linear. I've tried various different things. I guess going all the way back, I'm a physicist by trade. I came here over 10 years ago, which is slightly surreal to say in a room, but came here first over 10 years ago to do a master's in physics. I really liked it's going to sound really nerdy, but I just really liked the Bernoulli equations. I really liked fluid flow. I really liked atmospheric physics in particular. I think that's maybe a theme that we might come upon today. Is there are 2 types of people I find in sustainability. One, who have found it through vocation. They've kind of always been interested in sustainability, and then there's another bracket who found sustainability by accident. And I think I'd characterize myself definitely in the latter group. I found my way there through numbers, through equations. And so, after my master's, I got offered a PhD here in atmospheric physics, so under Professor Heather Graven. And it was on emissions modeling in California, which I loved, and it was in the Grantham Institute. And I know Niel from our Grantham days as well. And I think at the time, the Grantham Institute were very big on, and I'm sure they still are, very big on the communications and translation aspects. For good reason. If you're going to do a PhD or do a course in climate science or sustainability, you need to kind of get out there to people and talk about your work. And I really liked that. I think my supervisor would probably say I liked it more than my actual day job at times. And so then through that, I found the Institute for Molecular Science and Engineering. My former boss is sitting in the front row, so I'm going to have to watch what I say. But we had a great time. Speaking personally anyway, I had a great time with MZ being their translation manager. So on that communication piece, how do you translate complex science to various different stakeholders? So industry, government, whoever doesn't know kind of the complex research that happens in Imperial. I guess doing that job, although there was some climate elements to it, I did miss what I was doing in my PhD, the climate, the kind of raw climate research. And I had a few friends that had started doing jobs in what was then and is still called ESG investing, and most people are aware of it now. It was still quite an early burgeoning community back in 2018, 2019. And yeah, they were kind of, these friends would kind of tell me about their day, and it was, kind of creating these climate models and analytics that investment managers, portfolio managers would use to assess companies, and just kind of outlining the real world impact they were having by, billions of pounds of assets under management, flowing to and fro because of their models. And so that was something I was interested in. I think the real world impact really interested me. And so I joined a startup called ESG Book, building, as I said, these kind of data models for assessing companies and their ESG and climate credentials. And yeah, I think kind of cut my teeth in the area. Like any job, after a while, I was keen to kind of to move on and to explore more. And so yeah, I found my current job in the London Stock Exchange Group. And instead of corporate level, I'm assessing kind of countries, their climate commitments. Are they credible? And are they aligning with kind of global climate goals? And that's my story.
I think we'll just go along if you don't mind taking the next one.
Thanks for that. I feel like now I can talk about my nerdy side as well. So I also did a physics degree here at Imperial, and at the time I really wanted to find a career that allowed me to apply my problem-solving skills, and that was when I first heard about climate change, about peak oil back then, kind of 15 years ago, and that was a term that was used quite a lot. So I and then pursued a master's degree in sustainable energy futures at the Energy Futures Lab, and have then spent the next 12 years of my career working in the energy transition space. So I actually started in oil and gas because that was the only job I can find. I was on a graduate program working in gas. I very much didn't want to stay in touch with my course mates because I was so embarrassed about not actually working in renewable energy. But luckily, about 2.5 years after that, Shell started to set up its renewables business, and that was the time when I moved across to that part of the organization and helped them start a new business called Distributed Energy, which very much focused on any energy generation or flexible assets that's sitting behind the meter. So that could be residential projects, they could be rooftop solar for business parks, things like that. So I spent about 3.5 years really going on that journey with Shell, as also the organization was going through an expansion of the renewables business. But towards the end of that, I very much felt like perhaps that wasn't really the right place for me to make a bigger impact. I saw a lot of challenges in policy and regulation because we really lacked the right market signals for those projects to be commercially viable for businesses to actually invest in that. So that's when I decided to make a perhaps an unusual move, which was to move into civil service. So I spent a year at Ofgem working on, at the time was a confidential project, but later became REMA, which is one of the biggest market redesign projects in recent decades. That's really about transforming our electricity systems in a way that's fit for purpose for low carbon generation and flexibility going forward. And after that, I then spent about 2 years at National Grid ESO, helping them set up a distributed flexibility team over there as well. So really very much combining my commercial background, developing distributed energy projects, and also working in a government department, setting up policies to really apply that in National Grid, which is an organization that's quite central to the energy transition. So helping them think about how we can incorporate more lower carbon and smaller scale energy projects into the system. And then 2 years after that, I then moved to a startup called Piccolo, and I spent a bit of time there also helping them develop their solutions in, so they are a energy platform company facilitating, again, distributed small-scale energy projects and helping them integrate into many systems all over the world. So I've kind of always had a passion around the same problem, which is how can we accelerate the energy transition, particularly around how do we enable smaller, quicker to implement more flexible energy assets at scale, and looked at the same problem from all the angles I can kind of think of. That's public sector, private sector, innovation, policy. And last year was when I actually decided, I feel like I've kind of done everything in the sector. I've seen everything, and it's the challenge that I wanted to solve as the next step was actually to support other people who are in the sector. So that was when I actually decided to leave the energy sector kind of content-wise and focus exclusively on supporting other people through career coaching, leadership coaching. I also run a community for women in climate change called the Climate Circle. And the purpose of that is really about facilitating people to build meaningful relationships. Because in the time I've worked in the sector, through speaking to other people, I find that most people are mission-driven. They really want to make a positive impact. But at the same time, it's a very challenging sector. Things are changing all the time. Everyone feels like they don't know what's going on. Like no one is an expert, and everyone feels like they can't keep up to date with all the policy and the technical changes. But how do you really help people to stay in the sector, to continue to make a positive impact, to innovate and try different things? And that's what I'm focusing on, which is both one-to-one support for people to go through career changes, but also through the power of community to help people meet each other and share these challenges. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm glad to be here. My name is Victor. So my background is perhaps a bit different, as I'm mainly focusing on research at the moment. I have a degree in chemistry. I'm from Spain, and I've always been interested in basically the molecular world. How can we make new materials and understand them? And at some point, at the end of my degree, I was actually kind of looking forward of how can we bridge this fundamental understanding to industry and the public sector and so on. And I was looking of ways of doing that, and I stumbled across this master's in molecular science and engineering in the IMSI, which I sadly just learned that it does no longer exist. But back then, it was a really, really excellent program with cutting across different disciplines in I think a very innovative way. And one aspect of that that was really useful was a lecture series that we had, in which I met what would become my future PhD supervisor, which is Claire Gray. She's a professor at the University of Cambridge. So I met her there. Then I got really interested in battery materials and particularly how can we engineer them from a molecular point of view at the interfaces to enable better performance, but also increasingly more sustainable materials as well. And so I went there to do a PhD, which was really interesting. I basically was on lithium-ion batteries, and I also worked on electrocatalysis for some time. And the focus of my work there was, as I said, on developing molecular approaches to engineer interfaces, and in the later stages also on how can we recover spent battery materials and regenerate them so they can be reused, and in that way enable circularity in the economy of those materials. So after that, I moved to Oxford, and I continued researching energy storage technologies. This time I'm focusing on polymer electrolytes and solid-state batteries. And I continue to do research, but also I've engaged on a higher level on funding panels and with the general public in conferences and so on, which has been really interesting to see a bit the bigger picture of that as well. And I'm moving forward. I'm looking to continue a career in academia and to explore these energy materials further. That's me.
So happy to introduce myself. So I'm Isabelle. So I did the Sustainable Energies Masters about 3 years ago at Imperial. So my path to sustainability sort of started during my undergrad degree. So I'm from Canada and I did a civil engineering degree there. And I think there was sort of, I liked my degree, but there was one class that I took in renewable energy, and it was sort of like my last year, and I feel like it was where I finally lit up a little bit more than I had in some of my civil engineering courses. So that was sort of where it clicked for me that I wanted to move into the renewables space. So after that course, I was really keen on getting a job in renewables. I think just in Canada, it's a bit of a small market, so I didn't exactly, I came out of school, I had a civil engineering degree, so I wasn't able to get that job exactly in renewables. So I was in more, like a bit more in line with what I had studied in construction management and real estate development with sort of a sustainable developer doing district heating. So I think sometimes that happens where you're really keen, but just in terms of what's going on in the market, I landed in that. And so I did that for a few years and I enjoyed it, but I still had like this itch to move into renewables. So I think I gained a ton of transferable skills from that job. So I think just something to note, if it's not the exact job you were thinking of, you will always gain skills that will lead you to whatever path you're trying to get on. So that's when I pivoted to do the Sustainable Energies Masters so that I could really get into the renewable energy space. So I had a fantastic year in that Masters. I think amazing. I loved learning about how all the different technologies worked. And just being in a classroom with a lot of like-minded people from all over the world was amazing. So then that led me to after the Masters, I knew I wanted to be in renewables. I didn't know exactly where in renewables I wanted to be in. So I ended up working in consulting at Pexa Park, which is a PPA consultancy firm. So for anyone that doesn't know, a PPA is basically a contract, without going into too much detail, a contract between an energy producer and a buyer of the energy that basically you agree on a set price so that they can ensure that it reduces risk from the energy market. So I did that for about a year and really enjoyed it. And then that sort of gave me the opportunity to actually consult for Octopus Energy Generation, where I currently am. So I think it's just another, things just happen the way they happen and leads you to where you are. So after that, I ended up getting this job with Octopus Energy just over a year ago, where now I'm working in their M&A team, focusing more on investing in developers throughout Europe. So solar developers, wind developers, battery storage developers, all throughout Europe. So I think I've really loved this job because it uses basically all of the skills that I've gained over the past years, like energy markets, development experience, which I learned in the real estate world. So it kind of brought it all together and ended up where I am now. So I think it's a space that I've kind of found where I like in the energy market and look forward to continue growing in it.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. My journey into sustainability, I think, probably I like that setting that you had, Kieran, at the beginning of sort of those who maybe discovered it along the way and those for whom it was always there. And I think for me, it probably was always there. I was a bit of a sort of hippie environment kid who was always angry about people, littering plastic on the streets and things. And I think was always sort of quite environmentally conscious as a kid. When I was a kid, probably the way I would have seen that living out, I'd have been like, okay, well, I need to do some things myself about lifestyle changes around travel or diet or things. I went to university to study physics, another lapsed physics graduate here, and got involved in activism there. So I got involved in campaigning around fossil fuel divestment, trying to get the insane amounts of money that my university was investing in fossil fuel companies shifted to greener assets. And partly through that, and partly also through a research placement I did in the geography department at the university, I guess I became aware of the idea of systems and that we were living in some really big, complicated systems, the energy system, and that's embedded within the economic system, which is then interacting really heavily with the land and climate system, and which all of which is being enabled or often disabled by the political system. I became quite aware of these different systems and the fact that actually the levers that I had to engage in this thing that I really cared about, climate change, were not just what I did as an individual, but about how I tried to engage in that broader system. So I think that was sort of my journey into thinking, oh, hang on, I could actually do something with my job and with my career that also engages in this. And yeah, having done a physics degree, I felt I had some really good sort of problem solving and quantitative skills. I'm sure everyone here, if you're working at Imperial, you'll have those skills. And so I really wanted to apply those to this system change. And I decided for me, I was most interested, in the energy and economic side of things, although I'd done physics, and I think it's super important fundamental climate physics still to be done. I decided I was more interested in that sort of battle in economics and policy. So I came to Imperial at that point to do a PhD at the Grantham Institute. And I was doing a PhD looking at global energy system models, which are used often, for example, by the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to sort of map out what does the future 1.5 degree world look like? If we want to meet the Paris Agreement goals, what sort of transitions do we need? And so I spent a few years here sort of looking at those models, thinking about how they can be really useful to tell a story to policymakers, also seeing where they can be not so useful and need improving. And I guess that got me really interested, particularly in the science policy interface. Sort of through working on that, I saw that science can be an incredible tool for good in guiding policy, and also often, sometimes just due to lack of understanding or capacity in policymaking, sometimes due to maybe actually more nefarious things, is not always used to guide a transition which is just and fast and fair and sustainable. Yeah, and so I decided I really wanted to stay on that sort of science policy interface, thinking about how do we do the best possible research, but also, I think like Kieran was saying at the beginning, translate that research effectively for policymakers. And so having left my PhD 3 years ago, I went and worked for an organisation called Climate Analytics, which is where I am still now. We are a global think tank thinking about the climate system and the climate transition that we need. So sort of spanning from sort of climate impacts and fundamental climate science through to sort of the energy transition, which is where I work, and then trying to integrate that work into international negotiations and provide evidence to decision makers. And so that's where I work now, and sort of still work very much in the energy transition space, but at a range of different scales. So sometimes sort of bottom-up electricity modelling, or other times sort of developing methodologies from a sort of high level to sort of rate the actions of different countries and track where they should be going versus where they are going. Yeah, and I feel really, really lucky to have a job that has purpose. We're very lucky if we have the choice to try and find a job that has purpose. And I think, as everyone on the panel said, sometimes that's a bit of a wobbly journey, but if you have the chance to do that, I think that's an immense privilege. And so I feel very grateful to be able to do that. But I also feel some sense of responsibility of, within the world as a whole, if we look at all, global citizens, I have, by accident of education and, the country that I live in, been given quite a lot of power, and I really want to use that to try and achieve climate justice as much as I can. And so that's sort of why I am in the place I am.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your stories and your journey so far. So the rest of this session, we're going to open it up to the audience. So if you have any questions, please do raise your hand and the microphone will be brought to you. I'm going to kick us off with one. What is something that you find the most satisfying about your current job?
I think for me, one of the things that I find super satisfying is that I'm the potential to learn still. I am quite impact focused. The top line for me is I want to be working somewhere where I think I can make a difference, but I am also a massive nerd. And so I love learning still, and it's great to be in a space and the energy transition and the climate transition it's just fascinating. There's so much to learn about land use change and how, that's something I've been learning quite a lot at the moment, sort of, what's going to happen as the planet heats up to our land use systems, and how much can we really rely on trees and tree planting to offset emissions? The answer is not a lot. But learning about that, or learning more about innovation and what sort of technologies might scale well or not. Like, there's a huge amount to learn in the space, and the more you learn, the more impactful you can be. And so there's a really nice sort of positive circle of, I think, of learning and impact and learning that this sort of space allows you to be part of.
Given that a lot of students won't really know what they want to do next, can the panel give any advice to current students just finishing up about things they can do to gain more skills or experience, or perhaps to network?
So I think this probably also applies to people at like our stage of their career. One of the things I really recommend people do to stand out in applications and in their career is to really start something that's their own. Because it's actually, when you go through, I remember going through job applications, that sense of like, lack of control, that sense of, you're sending out hundreds of applications, not hearing anything back. But when you start your own project, you have so much freedom and creativity that you can pour into that project, and you end up picking up a lot of different skills along the way, and they really set you apart from other students that perhaps haven't actually tried anything on their own yet, or maybe also haven't managed to get any internships. I'm one of those people that never had an internship until I had my first job. So being able to, a lot of people have degrees that are relevant. They have, they have a passion for the sector. But if you're demonstrating anything you're doing to take an extra step on this, whether that's you're starting a blog, or you are starting a network, you are starting a campaign, anything that you can do to show your take initiatives, you're creative, you're willing to invest your energy into something you're passionate about, I think will really give you a really good opportunity to start that new career.
Any other advice from the panel?
Yeah, I can add to that actually. That I think something really simple is that I think deep down we all know what we're passionate about, and so be honest to yourself and follow that passion and be consistent throughout your career. And I think that consistency is appreciated by the people who hire you later. It's just a simple thing, but for example, for me, I've always been interested in science and that kind of research, and I've just been constant on that. And I've done lots of internships and different things, which ended up perhaps not being directly relevant to what I've done later, but I can see, looking back, how they were useful. But I think it's important to be honest to yourself and follow your own passion.
Just add a couple of things. One, I think, I really agree with everything that's been said here. One thing I'd build on that is trying to teach yourself skills which will be useful. And I think particularly now with the massive growing field of open source code and open source modeling, particularly if you want to work in sort of policy and energy transition space, there's loads of great courses out there from Technical University Berlin or something on energy system modeling that you can go through and teach yourself. I've found them super useful in sort of trying to develop that skill set. So if you have space and capacity to be developing your skills, I think that'd be good. The other thing, particularly if you want to work in policy, I would say is subscribe to Carbon Brief and read their emails. Carbon Brief is a climate journalism website, and they're an absolute machine. And actually when I did my PhD, my first half hour of every day is I would just read the Carbon Brief email and see what, and in terms of getting a good high-level understanding of what is happening in the energy transition and what matters.
Following our passions and taking the initiative to put ourselves out there and to make something of our own. Good to know that those of us who didn't do a physics degree can also make it.
Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm currently a master student at the Environmental Technology, this program, with the Center for Environmental Policy, CEP, and currently, we are kind of selecting the dissertation topics for our third term. So I would like to ask for some advice, like maybe from you, like about like how to select a topic, because we have some topics that involve some field trip. For example, we have one project about the forest, and it needs to go to Africa, and we also have some like food system topics related to field trip to Central Asia, to Qatar, and And besides this, we also have other topics that's more related to maybe London or Imperial, or others are some computer based. So actually I'm so grateful that we have so many like selections, but it's really hard for me like to make decision like which I'm going to choose. So I would like to listen to some of your advice from you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so something along the lines of, how do I know what's right for me in the world so vast of sustainability? How did you know you're in the right area you're currently in? Or like, how do you know that your path is leading towards the right area, or sustainability is the right area for you?
I can take that one. I'm not sure if I'm going to directly answer your question, I'm afraid, but I think this really ties into what was answered before. And I think it is, I don't know if this sounds a bit woolly, but it is a journey of self-discovery. It's kind of, taking aspects that you really like about whatever course or whatever module, whatever job you're doing. What are the things that you really like? What gets you out of bed excited? And even more importantly, what are the things that you don't like? I think for me, in the last job anyway, you kind of have to assess what are the things that you miss, that you're not getting in this current role, and seeking that out. So I think a kind of self-discovery, and that's where I think we talked about earlier the friendship group. Like, what are your friends discussing? Like, what is the kind of hot topic among your friendship group? And that kind of ties into networking later in life, when all your friends who were in your course now are quite senior in companies sometimes. And I think the last thing is, don't be afraid of trial and error. Like, I think learn from your mistakes, what you didn't enjoy about a role or a module or a subject, and kind of pledge to never do that again. Maybe. Yeah, that's a very high level kind of how you'd approach the subject matter. I don't have any prescription subjects that I could kind of think of off the fly. I guess Niel might be good for CEP, Centre for Environmental Policy. I'm sure you'd have a few ideas on the policy front.
I mean, what I was actually going to say, and this is not in any way I think it's a really good question, and I don't want to devalue it, but maybe also to take some pressure off it as well. Certainly I would imagine for others it's the same, but certainly in my think tank, there are people there who have done a master's in geology and a master's in lots of different fields, and I think whatever you end up picking, I'm sure that it will be an opportunity to learn a lot of very useful skills. And even if at the end of it you think, okay, that specific type of content knowledge is not what I want to go on and do, maybe that's another way to think about it, is what skills what transferable skills will I gain from this dissertation, regardless of if I stay in the topic? Because certainly in my field, there's lots of people who their master's wasn't directly related to where they are now, but they learned a load of skills which they're now using in the place where they've decided they want to be instead. So it doesn't have to sort of define where you're going next content-wise.
Happy to add on to that, and also saying that I did my dissertation has nothing to do with what I do now. But I think so in the private sector, for me, something I would look back on and maybe have included, if I had a field that I wanted to work in the private sector, I think I would have tried to do something where it includes interviews with a bunch of different companies, because I think it's a great way to be able to reach out to companies and have a 30-minute discussion, and you can learn a lot about what they do, and it's a way to easily have a coffee chat without, I think people are very happy to, not everyone is always happy to take chats when it feels like it's just for a job, but people are very happy to do something like that. So I think it's a great way just to be able to reach out to a bunch of different companies. And that's not something I did, but looking back, I think at other dissertations that would have been helpful.
Yeah, I think that all the panelists are bang on in like that you can change what you do, and sometimes you learn stuff that is transferable in the most unexpected ways. And so don't be afraid of like what. Yeah, I think that's correct. So I personally when I did my master's was in theoretical chemistry, and then I did a PhD in experimental chemistry, so I didn't have any skills when I came to the lab in terms of doing experiments. But I found that the background that I had helped me in other ways to, for example, process the data, interpret some theoretical frameworks that help me, then design experiments more efficiently. So, yeah, just what they say makes sense. And possibly also to add another perhaps piece of advice, I always found useful to try to think in long term, like where do you see yourself in 10 years or something like that, and then kind of see how the internship could fit into that bigger picture. And it might be that then when you do the internship, you realize that it was the wrong idea. But at least I think for me, it always helped to have this, try to be strategic about it.
So I think to summarize the panel's advice is their journeys to where they are today is also a roller coaster, to say the least. So perhaps this dissertation is an opportunity for a chance to find out what you don't know. And so you don't know what you don't know until you know. So this is your chance to find out what you know, and as Kieran would say, use it as a trial and error process.
I'm a first-year undergraduate in ecology, and I'm interested in the future in getting into more of the political field of combining politics and science, because I believe that that action in like policy making is going to make like a big impact in actually like changing the world. And so I was wondering if you have any tips of getting into this political field, and any advice on specific things I could do to connect this ecological background to a more like political and UN related or sustainable field. Yeah.
I don't know a lot about the more sort of ecology policy interface. I guess a lot of my background and experience has been much more in the like energy policy space. But I think I would say like try and find some of those organizations which are doing that sort of translation work between those spaces. Like I don't know what they are exactly, but I'm sure they exist. I mean, for example, like WWF has a big policy arm, and they do a lot of conservation and ecology work. And often, quite a few of these organizations might have opportunities for internships or things in the summer, or even if not, like reading the policy briefs that they are writing and like tracking their outputs, I think can be really useful just to get a bit of a sense of like what the space is and think a bit about that sort of translation work. So I think that would be my first thought, is sort of look for the people who are doing the translation already. And yeah, certainly in the UK, like, for example, RSPB and WWF would be good places to start. On the sort of link with the UN processes, it would be worth looking at, there's the Convention for Biological Diversity, the CBD, which is, it's like the similar thing to the Climate Convention, but for biological diversity. Just the last negotiations just finished in Rome, I think, a couple of weeks ago. But it would be good, like, even like right now, probably a good time to sort of search that online and see what sort of NGOs, like non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations are like tracking and writing about the link between science and negotiations there. And you might find some very interesting things, like organizations to track from that.
And Kieran, you don't just work with organizations, but you also work with governments and like nations. So like, is there a perspective on policy from your aspect from working with governments of these sizes?
Yeah, I guess we're slightly maybe one step removed from the actual kind of policy maker element. We kind of assess the output of that policy, if that makes sense, and translate that for investors. But I think to maybe touch on the point, as somebody who's kind of ventured to other fields, so as a physicist getting into communications, I think being a subject matter expert is actually something a lot of these organizations are looking for. It's a lot easier for you as a subject matter expert to get read up on say, you know, I don't want to belittle political science, but it can be easier for you as a subject matter expert who understands ecology to then train up on politics surrounding ecology, because you come from that technical expertise, so you understand how it works. It's a lot harder for somebody who's done PPE or political science to get trained up on the intricacies around land use change and biodiversity. So I think it's much easier for you to enter their world than it is for them to enter your world. So I think there will always be demand for people like yourself.
Yeah.
And just to follow on, I would say it seems like you've already kind of done a little bit of your homework on identifying who the main players are. WWF is a great one, and the UN. And I just think, you know, it's kind of like the foot in the door. You know, identify who those people are. It was talked about before. I think everyone is quite open to having conversations and discussions on what you can do to better yourself if you want a role in that organization or similar organizations. So,
I mean, my advice would be you can join some of our student campaigns that already exist, so they see the interface of advocating for the environment, also like advocating for the university to make changes, policy changes. So that's a local scale, and then also you can, I think, like what you're pursuing has its value, because we have the Grantham Institute at Imperial, but it also has an LSE equivalent. So that is where policy meets science. So there is definitely an intersect that exists. So, and then there's the Center for Environmental Policy that Candy is part of. So like, there's definitely a lot of opportunities around. So best of luck. Any other questions from the audience? We have a few more minutes left.
Thank you for being here. It's cheering for us. Basically, I have two questions. First, I see a lot from like start applying for a job here. I can see that there are some environmental analysts and environmental consultants. So it would be nice if you are able to share the difference between the two. Another thing is that transitioning from Thailand job market to the UK job market, which is super challenging. And then another layer is that a transition from some other background. I was like, my undergrad was chemistry, and then a transition to something in sustainability. So do you have any advice on that? Thank you very much.
Second question. I think basically if you have a background in chemistry, you don't need that transition into sustainability, because it's the core of the question, right? How can we make materials in a circular way? Or how can we enable energy storage and conversion technologies? It's all chemistry. So as they already touched on, you know, even if you want to go into policy or some other industry, your expertise is going to be highly valued, and you can capitalize on that thing.
Maybe I can answer the first one, because we're actually actively recruiting for a climate analyst at the minute. So I know a thing or two about the work of analysts. So for us, it's typically quite quantitative. So our analyst will essentially look at countries' emissions targets and kind of work out a number. Like when the UK sets a particular NDC, National Determined Contribution, a target, what does that mean, like in a numerical sense? And so kind of building data sets, then kind of more sophisticatedly, so you would essentially plug that data into modeling and to produce analyses. So that would be, for us anyway, the bread and butter of an analyst. And they sit within the company developing proprietary data and analytics for our company. Consultancy usually sits outside the company. So if you are, if you are a company and you have an issue or you want a solution to a particular problem, but you don't have the internal skill set or capabilities, that's when you would bring in a consultant. And so a consultancy usually is a subject matter expert in a particular area that would then help out other companies.
Isabelle, do you have anything to add from your experience working in an environmental consultancy in your past?
Yeah, I think, well, just on the job titles, I would say even in consultancy, sometimes they'll be called analysts. So It's very confusing. I would say the job titles are just very confusing in general, and they mean completely different things in different organizations. So I wouldn't be deterred by a job title. I would find out more about the position and then see whether it's the right fit.
Yeah, so it sounds like the job description is more important than the title. And if you like your numbers, analyst sounds like the thing for you. If you like telling people what they should do, consultancy sounds like the right thing for you. Hope that helps. Anybody have any advice on transitioning between countries? How was it for you, Isabelle, going from Canada to the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Canada to the UK. It was somewhat similar work cultures, and it helped a lot to have the visa from Imperial. So I think that, that makes it much easier having the 2-year visa from Imperial. But yeah, I think it was difficult finding a job in general. I don't know whether that was market specific, moving countries, or I was also transitioning industries. So I would just say consistency, and I just kept persevering, and then eventually something will definitely turn up.
My advice on that is you're not alone. There are a lot of international students here at Imperial also finding that transition, so myself included. So you're not alone. We see you. That is all the time we have for questions today. I just want to thank our panelists again today for joining us and sharing your stories with us. So thank you so much for joining. This is the end of Sustainability Fortnight, I believe. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for being part of it. And see you next year.